Hey guys, it's Kevin with my review for Bad Boys Ride or Die. In this film, we continue to center on the adventures of Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett. You know, they're going about their usual stuff. They hear about this drug cartel that is out there that is falsely accusing their former captain, Howard, of all of their misdeeds. And so the two of them have to do what they can to work together to try to clear his name, but also bring down this drug cartel as well as keep themselves out of the crosshairs. So Bad Boys Ride or Die, I was actually very excited for this film, which is kind of crazy considering that, I'll give you my brief thoughts on the other films. I'm not a huge fan of the first two Bad Boys movies. I know that they're films that a lot of people really enjoy. I've just never really been a big fan of them. I found them very generic. They didn't really stick with me like story-wise and things like that. So, they're not really films that I really find myself want to go back to. In fact, I was going to do a full rewatch, and I really just ended up rewatching the third one because I enjoyed the third one a lot. Like, way better than I thought it was going to be. I literally just did a rewatch of it like before this movie, and it still holds up so incredibly well, diving deeper into the characters and all these interesting themes, and just really, I think, taking the franchise to a level that it hasn't been before. And, coming off the heels of that film, I was really excited to see if they were going to be able to continue. I really wanted to see what they were going to follow up with, because it really seemed like they finally had perfected the formula of this franchise, and I was interested in seeing how this one was really going to play out. It's obviously been a while since we've had another Bad Boys movie. That was all the way back in 2020, which feels forever ago, even though it was 4 years ago at this point. It's kind of crazy. But we have Bad Boys Ride or Die, and I was just really hoping that this would retain what worked in For Life, but also it seemed like from the marketing was going to be a little bit more, going in a sillier direction and things like that, and I was just really hoping this would be a really fun time. I think it's the perfect time for it to come out during, the summer movie season, things like that, so I was just really hoping this was going to deliver. And while I don't think this movie is quite on the level of the previous film, I still had a damn good time with Bad Boys Ride or Die. In fact, it's easily one of the most fun I've had with any movies really this year, and really I think is just the pure definition of what a great summer blockbuster should really be. But we are just going to go ahead and get into it right now, starting off with the cast here. And what's there to say about the cast here that hasn't been said before? I mean, as usual, these films always deliver in terms of the actors, and this is really the case here. Although I feel like this movie, the one thing I will give it over For Life is that it really utilizes the ensemble very well in this movie. But of course, these movies would really be nothing without its two main actors, and they're both really good here. Will Smith, once again, is very good as Mike Lowry. I don't think he's giving quite the performance he gave in For Life, but he still is really great in this film. You can see he's kind of Will Smith is still really great as Mike Lowry here. He's kind of in a different phase in his life in this movie. There's a lot of things that have gone down with him prior, since the events of For Life, and so you kind of see him in this new role where he isn't nearly as fearless and things like that, and I really enjoyed that. There's a lot of new ideas they kind of explore with this character and him having these, panic attacks and things like that, and I really enjoyed, what they end up doing with him, but also just really, again, showing Smith's chops as an actor. He's always going to be very charismatic and very fun, but I also think he just puts a lot of effort into this role, and it's really just great to see, how long he's played this character. Really just hasn't missed a step here, and I think he just does such a great job here in continuing to challenge himself as an actor within this role, and I really like what they've been doing with him. But Martin Lawrence, honestly, might steal this entire movie for me as Marcus, just because, everything they do with him in this movie is nothing like what you've seen before. I can't really get into it too much, but let's just say there is something that happens to him early on in the film that basically convinces him that he's immortal, and so throughout the entire movie you see this far more fearless side of Marcus that you haven't seen before, and my god, Martin Lawrence just fully leaned into the ridiculousness of this character and just really did such an amazing job. He had me in absolute stitches throughout the movie, and it really just makes me wish that we get to see more of him in films, because I generally think that he has such incredible, and I've always thought this, in all the movies I've thought this, but especially this film really just reminds me just how much he nails comedic timing. There's so many moments in this movie, a lesser actor, it would just come across as stupid, but because Lawrence is just so on on pat the entire film, and because he really just is just but because Lawrence is always delivering, and always, is so on pat when it comes to his timing, I mean, it really just never lets up. I always found myself just absolutely bursting out with laughter at everything he ended up doing. I thought he was just so much fun in this movie, but again, really just putting a lot of effort into this role, and it really just makes me hope that we get to see more from Martin Lawrence in other movies. I mean, if he continues to do Bad Boys films, I'm fine with that, but I want to see him in other stuff, because I think he's a really great actor, and I think that he just doesn't get enough credit, and I think this movie really just reminds us how great he can really be. So I was just really loving what he was doing in this movie, and the chemistry between these two is still incredible. All these years later, these two just work so incredibly well together. I think that really is what makes these films work as well as it does, is just the banter, but also just the genuine bond that these two really have. It's just so infectious throughout the movie, and I really just, again, I think they could honestly just keep making these for the rest of their lives, because of just how well, just because of how well these two work together. And this really isn't any different here. These two really just haven't missed a step in terms of their chemistry, but if anything, I think it honestly has improved from film to film. It certainly seems like this is the one where maybe the two of them were having the most fun. I've always enjoyed their dynamic in this movie, but I don't know, this one, it just felt like they were just really giving it their all and putting their fullest into it, and it's just really great to see. This point of their career, they could easily be phoning in these roles, and they really aren't. They're putting so much effort into it, and it just makes the film that much more entertaining as a result, because they're having so much fun. You yourself are having just as much fun, and I think, again, the movie really just thrives off of their chemistry. It really always has, but, this is just the perfect example of just a duo that just works as well as it does, and it's just great to see that it hasn't at all lost its touch here. Now, as far as the rest of the actors go, everyone does a really good job here. Vanessa Hudgens and Alexander Ludwig, once again, are a lot of fun here. I really enjoyed their dynamic in the movie. I enjoyed them a lot in the previous film, but I think they give them even more to do here, and I thought that they were just a lot of fun to watch, and I really enjoyed them. Same with Paola Núñez. I really liked her in the previous film, and I think that she does a good job here. I thought that, she was just a really big standout for me, but Jacob Scipio really kind of gets an upgrade as a role here. I mean, yes, he was really good in For Life, and I thought that he was a very imposing villain, but they go down this sort of redemption type storyline with him, and it really does end up giving Armando as a character a very meaty role in this movie, and I think he really ended up pulling it off here. I thought he did a really great job just showing a completely different side of this character than we had seen before, and I thought it worked really well. It didn't feel like something where they were just retreading what worked in the first movie. No, it just feels like we're seeing this character at a different point in his life, and I thought that he ended up really just excelling at that, and I was really I really enjoyed his performance here a lot, so I thought he was a really big standout here for me. Eric Dane is good in this movie. I'll get into his character a little bit later, but I think that he does a very good job at playing just this very menacing villain that you really just don't want to mess with in any way. He is so relentless in what he does, and he's someone that is so is very intimidating and things like that, and I think that he really understood what he needed to do for that character. Again, I'll talk about the character he's playing a bit later, but I think performance-wise, he really nailed it here. I really enjoyed what he ended up doing here. Tiffany Haddish is really good. Rhea Seehorn, not an actor that I knew was in this movie, but she is very good here as well. I really enjoyed her arc throughout this film. I enjoyed the incorporation of her. Ioan Gruffudd, really good here. I enjoyed his performance in this movie, but the other person I really gotta highlight once again is Joe Pantoliano. I thought the way that they incorporate him in this movie was really interesting. Obviously, you have the main plot here with Captain Howard, but there's a little bit more that he gets to play with in this movie, and I thought it worked really well. It kept him as still kind of like the heart and soul of this movie, but also made it so Howard had a, but also so you felt his presence throughout the entire film. And I thought that he just did a really great job here. They continue to utilize him really well. Even after the character's been killed off, they continue to utilize his character well. And so overall, I mean, I just think this was a really talented ensemble. I think everyone did a really good job. The only other actor, though, we gotta highlight here is Dennis Green, who plays Reggie. I can't say too much about him in this movie, but he has this one scene in the film, and it's probably going to be the scene that everybody's talking about. I mean, everyone has been talking about it in reviews, and honestly, it is it's completely warranted as to why. Like, you can understand watching this movie why people are raving about him, but he really is just so great in this film. You really find yourself rooting for this guy. He has some really great moments, especially towards the end of this movie. Aside from the one sequence everyone's been talking about, he has a great moment towards the end of this film. It just really seemed like he was putting so much effort into this, and I really enjoyed his performance a lot here. Really, everyone just does a really great job in this film. I feel like this maybe is the strongest ensemble we've had of any of these Bad Boys films. It's certainly the movie I think that utilizes the supporting characters, in the best way they can, and I was very impressed by everybody here. All right, so now we really do have to get into the directing in this movie, which that was really the main thing I was impressed by in the previous film, is the directing by Adil and Bilall. I thought both of them did a really good job in the previous movie of taking a similar approach to what Michael Bay did, but kind of stripping it back and giving it its own style. And even more so here, it feels like with For Life, they were kind of trying to, find their way into this franchise, but also add their own spin on it. But now that they are, now that they are much more comfortable, they really get to let loose in this film. And as a result, there's a lot of stuff they end up employing here that I thought worked really well. For one, I mean, the comedy is just so good in this movie. I was laughing hysterically throughout this film, pretty consistently throughout this film. There really wasn't a joke that I didn't end up somewhat, getting some reaction at me. And so I think that they do a great job with knowing when to factor in humor. But again, the thing they did so well in For Life, they continue to do well here, and that is that heart of the movie. They really do a great job with that here. It never feels like it's coming out of nowhere. It just feels like it fits organically into the film. And so it's really great to see a franchise that was attached to one director now really has forged its own identity with these new directors. It kind of shows that, like, sometimes all you need to breathe new life into a franchise is just to get a new director and let them do what they want to do. Just let them cook in that way, And that's exactly what they did, what these two end up doing here, but also having a far more relentless style. I mean, this movie really is just off the walls in terms of what they end up doing. There's a lot of interesting places they end up going when it comes to the action side of this one. We'll talk more about that with the cinematography, but I was just really impressed by their directing in this movie. I think they have such an interesting and unique style to them, and you watch this movie, and I mean, the fact that their Batgirl movie was canceled, I generally am just continued, I was already in shock about, but especially after watching this movie, it's like, how do you see the work that they've put into these movies and think, oh yeah, that Batgirl movie, yeah, we can shelve that. No one cares about that. Like, these two have so much talent and so much style of their own, but also have such an interesting vision. I need to see them direct more movies. I think they have such a future ahead of them. And though, yes, they haven't done like a ton of stuff before, everything that I've seen them do, I've been a fan of, whether it's, these two movies, whether it's the episodes of Miss Marvel that they directed. I really just want to see them continue to, direct films, because I think they have such an interesting sort of, interesting and unique approach to them. And it just really is saddening to see their talents be wasted in the way it is. But it's great to see them utilized in this movie. It just sucks that their film that was really probably going to put them even further on the map is never going to see the light of day. So fuck you, Zavslav, for that. We're not having that conversation. That's a different conversation. But again, I had to bring it up because it really just sucks to see that happen with the effort that they're putting into this movie, directing wise. But the point is, they do a great job, and it's just really great to see them continue to build off what worked in the previous film, but also, again, feeling a little more confident and really just going all out with their style in this movie. I really enjoyed that a lot here. There's a lot of ambitious sort of approaches they take to this film that I thought worked really well, and I really liked what they were trying to do here, and so I thought that their directing was really strong in this movie. The writing is really where we get to some of the things that I think are going to be an issue for some people, because I will say right off the bat, this is a relatively predictable plotline. You kind of have an idea of where it's going to go. It goes in all the directions you kind of expect it to, and so there isn't really a lot that is that special in terms of, the, main sort of conflict that's going on here. Pretty much the direction this is headed, and so there's not a lot to talk about on that front. But I mean, I've always said I don't really care if a story is predictable if it's done well, and it is done well here. I still found myself invested in the story, and I think they leave enough breadcrumbs along the way for you to still be really hooked in, really kind of not sure what direction this is going to go in, kind of, have some doubt as to whether or not what happened is what happened. And so I think they do a good job when it comes to that. But what impresses me about this movie, once again, and something that I think worked really well in the previous film, is just the writing for both of these two characters. I mean, something I was really impressed by in For Life is that they really did get deep when it came to the character of Mike Lowry. They dived a lot deeper into him. They really did some interesting things with him in that movie, and that continues to be the case here. And what's really cool about this film in particular is that the dynamic we usually have between these two characters is kind of turned on its head. Usually you have Mike Lowry as like the fearless, unconcerned guy who's just willing to do whatever it takes to complete a mission. And then you have Marcus, who is usually the one that is fearful of what's going on. And he's usually the one that, in the beginning of this movie, telling him to slow down and things like that. Talking about how he's not a great, talking about how he drives too fast and he's not really a fan of a lot of the, more threatening scenario, threatening situations that these two get themselves in. I mean, one of the funniest moments in For Life is that car chase and him just freaking out about, what's going on. I mean, that's one of the funniest moments in the movie. Here, it's actually the opposite because, again, I don't want to say too much, but basically, Marcus, very early on in the movie, has this health scare of sorts, and from there, pretty much convinces himself that he is immortal and nothing bad can really happen to him. So you get to see a Marcus that feels so much more confident and is so much more willing to get his hands dirty in a way that we haven't really seen before. But they also do this really fun recurring joke with him where he is constantly eating sweets but shouldn't be. And so you have this dynamic of him trying to constantly go for any sort of candy or any sort of sugar that he gets a hold of, and you have Mike trying to hold him back from that. So that's already a really fun dynamic. But then you also have a Mike Lowry who is not nearly as courageous as he usually is. Yes, he still has that those heroic qualities to him, but he's in a different phase in his life. There are other things that have gone down since then that are kind of at risk because of this mission, and so there's a lot more on the line for him, and it's really cool to see the way they played into this dynamic. There is this thing they do with Mike in the movie where he's having these panic attacks and things like that, and he is really just not as at ease with this mission, and you can really see how this is starting to affect him. And I thought that was a really good way, again, to keep this dynamic fresh and exciting, but also get you to care about these characters, despite the fact that I will say this movie is very silly at points. They do a good job of getting you to care about these characters and finding a way to keep them exciting. It doesn't feel played out because they're doing something different this time around. And I think that's a genius way to keep things from getting stale. I feel like there's so many franchises we talk about where it's how many times can we see this character do the same thing? But here it's all right, well, let's try to flip it. Let's try to get these characters to a place where things are a little bit different. And they do that really well here. I still felt believable to me. It didn't feel forced, like they were trying to just inject new life into this franchise, but trying too hard at doing so and it not feeling like it fit with the characterizations we've seen before. No, they're still the characters we've seen before. They're just, again, there's different circumstances going on that have caused them to feel differently than we have seen prior, and I think that works really well in this movie. So that was something that I thought worked really well here. I really enjoyed the characterizations of both of them in this movie. I thought that was something that worked really well here. And then I mentioned before, I think when it comes to the side characters in this movie, this is easily the most depth we've had with any of them, especially when it comes to the character of Armando, who I thought was already a really strong villain in For Life. I really liked what they ended up doing with him in that movie. He didn't feel generic. He had a genuine motivation for what he was trying to do, and there was this, fractured bond between father and son. This movie, they kind of go in this, redemption sort of arc with him, and I thought it actually worked really well. I wasn't entirely sure if I was going to be able to buy into it, but by the end of the movie, I really found myself caring for Armando and the place that he ended up as a character, kind of diving into why he made the choices that he did, but now that that parental figure is no longer in his life, is he going to go down a different path, but also diving into the reconciliation of him and Mike. I think that's something else the movie does a really good job with. So again, I think there's some really good things they do here that not just makes the movie really entertaining, but also just makes it generally really well written. I thought there was a lot of good character work to ground this film. And then there's some other characters here, like Rhea Seehorn's character, for example. She is, yes, U.S. Marshal, who, yes, is hunting down Mike and Marcus, and obviously is going after Armando for what he did to Howard, but they give her a genuine motivation. They do a good job of developing her character. I didn't find her to be generic. I thought they actually fit her into the movie pretty well, and I was overall impressed by that. So, yeah, I mean, that was something that I thought worked really well in the movie. There's some other character dynamics that they do really well here that I don't want to hint at too much, but I overall enjoyed what they did here character-wise, and that's just something I'm impressed by. I think both Chris Bremner and Beall did a good job of saying, all right, yes, this movie's going to be a little less serious than the previous one, but we're still going to we're still going to have some really good grounded character moments. There was a moment in particular with Mike in this movie, and something they did with him that I just wasn't really expecting, but I thought it worked really well. It really made sense for the character, and that was something that I was really impressed by in this movie. So yeah, I thought once again the writing was very strong here. There's even some characters that start off in this movie and you don't think they're going to have that much of a role, but they end up having a much bigger one than you expect. Reggie is like the perfect example of this. The way he starts off in the movie, I mean, he has this scene that just literally comes out of nowhere, but kind of ends up being like the highlight scene of the entire film. And he really ends up being like the most heroic character in the movie. I can't really say much else, but my God, that scene, I mean, my audience was losing their minds. I've heard other audiences losing their minds. It's just the perfect example of how you take a character that you don't expect to have as much of an impact as he does, and then you do this thing with him, and it just completely makes you realize how much you love that character, and I love the way they utilized him in this movie, so I thought that was just really great to see. But again, I want to reiterate, like, this is a very silly film. There are a lot of things here that are, a lot of fun. There's some really funny moments, like I mentioned, the recurring gag with Marcus that I really enjoyed quite a bit. There's this really funny scene involving a crocodile. I can't really say much else than that, but I thought that was a really funny moment, what they end up doing there. There's also some cameos in this movie that, yes, I think some people might take issue with, but I thought, again, they did something fun with them. It didn't feel like it overpopulated the movie. It didn't feel like there were too many cameos in here. It felt like all the ones they did, they had a place in this movie, and so it didn't feel like it was taking away from the experience overall, so I don't really have too much of an issue when it comes to that. That said, the movie does not nearly cut as deep as it did in the previous film. There's no, monologue that there's no moment like the monologue that Mike has in For Life, which, on a rewatch, I mean, I was just really impressed by the places they went in that movie. They went in some very dark directions that I wasn't expecting, and they do similar stuff here, but it never gets quite to that level. But again, I like the fact that they're still trying to advance these characters and put them in different situations. What this movie is to say about aging and kind of phasing out of your life and kind of, having different experiences, I think works really well. And that's something I was really impressed by. There's this kind of message about forgiveness in the movie that I thought, really ended up tying the whole thing together really well. So again, there's a lot more thought put into this movie than you would expect in terms of the screenplay. And that's just something that I'm generally just really impressed by here. But of course, the big thing I think everyone is really excited about is the cinematography here, because that's really one of the big things you come to this movie for, is the really, impressive action sequences. And this film has no shortage of those. I mean, the thing that I will absolutely give this film over for life are the action sequences. I mean, they are just so impressive here. Every single one has you on the edge of your seat. Every single one ends up topping the last, but they also do some really interesting things with them. They have some really interesting camera angles. Everything feels really fluid, and everything feels very propulsive, and you feel every second of what's going on. But I also really enjoyed the way they kind of played around with different camera angles in this movie. I'm sure you've seen this clip going around of Will Smith having to hold this camera like to his chest, almost like it's a gun, having to hold this camera to his chest while he's holding a gun. And it's like this Call of Duty type POV shot, but that scene, I mean, really ends up delivering. The way that they factored that into the movie, I thought worked so incredibly well. It was a way to kind of, again, keep things exciting, but also really kind of do something different with the action that we hadn't seen from this franchise before. I think it's very easy, again, to just kind of do the same thing, but they're not doing that here. And that's credit to the directing, but also credit to the way that it was filmed. I was really impressed by a lot of the action in this movie, and I think that it really does deliver on that front. There's a really good, there's a really good scene in a plane as well that I thought was really exciting. So a lot of really great action in this movie. The climax in particular, I mean, really ends up sticking out here. That's really where you get the most memorable moments, but especially the Reggie sequence, like I said. The way they film that sequence, even the moment that I've mentioned with Reggie, even that was a little bit different than what we've seen before. I can't really say too much involving that scene because it's, the how it all plays out, I can't really get into too much. But what I will say is that I really appreciate the fact that they are trying to really just push the boundaries of action filmmaking. I think it would be very easy to just film this like a generic action movie, and they don't really do that. They really are taking some legitimate risks here, and I think they really do pay off in this movie. So I was really impressed by the action here. But I also want to talk about the cinematography, because honestly, I really enjoyed the cinematography in this film quite a bit. I think there's a lot of shots that really ended up sticking out to me. Just some of the close-ups they do in this movie, but also the way they frame certain things here, I thought worked out really well. There is one shot in particular in the first act involving Marcus, and it was honestly kind of stunning. Like, the way they ended up filming it, I thought was really well done. It helped, the momentum, it helped boost the momentum of the scene, but also got you to really care about what was going on. There's this interesting sort of running motif they do with both Mike and Marcus. Every time they are like kind of thinking about things, they cut to something, and I thought the way that was filmed was really well done. So again, I think the movie is shot very well, and I really enjoyed a lot of the cinematography in this movie. I don't really have a lot of complaints on that front either. The score here also I thought was really well done. Really just, again, was just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Lorna Balfe's score in this movie. I enjoyed it in For Life, and I continue to enjoy the score in this one. And then the editing in this movie, I think for the most part, is very well edited. I will say the first 20, 30 minutes, kind of choppy, kind of felt a little all over the place. But I think once the movie gets into a rhythm and gets you an idea of what it's gets more of an idea of what this movie is really going to be, it really just kind of doesn't let up from there, and I really just found myself so invested in what was going on, and I thought that the movie was paced really well. The ending also might be my favorite out of any of the Bad Boys movies. I really like the way this one ended, and I really just thought that they just went all out in terms of, and I really just found myself really enjoying the ending a lot here. I thought it was a really fun way to wrap up this film. That being said, there is quite a few things that do bring this film down that makes it not quite on the level of the previous installment of this franchise for me. And the biggest one is that there is a lot going on in this movie, if you haven't been able to notice. Despite the fact this film is the shortest in the franchise, it has enough story to where it maybe should be the longest one, because there's a lot that's really going on here. I mentioned before that Mike is in a different phase in his life, but we don't really get to see much of that at all. We don't really get to see much of this new dynamic he has. We don't really get to see how this has really affected him. It felt like they used this as a plot device to give his character a little bit more heft, and it worked in the sense that, like, yes, it really takes his character in an unexpected direction, but it felt like they did that just to get him there, and it didn't feel like they really zeroed in on this dynamic and how this has affected him overall, especially because we don't really get to see much of this new dynamic. We hear about it and we see, that he's worried, but again, it feels more like this plot device. It doesn't really feel like it fits in. It doesn't really feel like we were able to really double down on that, and I think that does hurt the movie a bit. I felt a little bit distant from his arc. I cared about Mike, and that's what, I think the reason it worked is because I cared about that character and I liked what they were doing with him, but it did feel like they just needed to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper in order for me to feel that much more invested in what was going on, but also feel just as worried for these characters. I think I definitely did, but I didn't feel quite as worried as I think the movie wanted me to, and I think, again, if they would have dived a little bit deeper into that, it would have made the film that much more tense in those moments. So that was definitely an issue for me. There's some other plot moments here, like what they were doing with Armando at first, involving him and Mike and them reconnecting. I enjoy what we get with them, but I wish there were a few more scenes of seeing these two trying to reconcile and putting their differences aside and trying to have this genuine, like, father and son type bond. They do some good stuff in the movie involving those two, but I just wish they dived a little bit deeper into it, because it just didn't feel like it was as integral to the film as it should be. It felt more like there was another storyline going on with Armando that they gave a little bit more they gave a little bit more time to. They spend a lot more time with this other thing going on with Armando, and I wish that they put just as much effort into that side of things, because I really was liking what they were doing there, and it just didn't feel like they did as much as they could have. Also, as much as I do enjoy Rhea Seehorn in the movie, she is overall very underused in this film. It feels like her character, I don't want to say she's an afterthought, because she definitely needs to be in this film. She gives the movie a sense of purpose and really ties into the theme that I think works really well. But I just thought what they were doing with her was a little surface level, and I wish they would have dived deeper into how she's affected by everything. We understand why she has the motivation that she does, but I just didn't feel as connected to her as I think the movie wanted me to be. So even though I liked everything they did with her, it just felt like they needed to spend more time with that character, because, I mean, one, I love Rhea Seehorn. I think she's an amazing actress. Watch Better Call Saul if you haven't. She's phenomenal in that. But I also just felt like they needed to do more with that character overall than they really did. But easily the biggest issue with this movie for me, I would say, is when it's concerning the villain of this movie. This is something that worked really well in For Life, and I thought was something that was a huge improvement upon the previous films. I really found myself connected to Armando as a character. I liked, his mom a lot. I liked the dynamic that those two really had. I understood their motivation, even though, yes, obviously I didn't agree with what they were doing. The movie did a good job of getting us to understand what they were doing. Unfortunately, there is no such character work when it comes to Eric Dane's character. His character overall, I found to be menacing. I found him to be a presence that every time he was on the film, I was very unnerved by him. But overall, I found his character to be relatively just kind of generic. He's kind of just like the unstoppable villain that has this evil plan, and you've just seen it 1,000 times before. He just kind of felt like a step back from what we got in the previous films, and that really sucks, because I think he had the potential to be maybe the best villain of this franchise. His performance definitely is for sure, on that level. I think he put all the effort he could into it, but there just isn't a lot for him to work with as a villain. He has this one really good scene when he's first introduced, and then other than that, I can't really tell you much about his character that stuck out to me. I don't even think I could really tell you his name, because he just wasn't really that memorable of a character to me. And so every time the movie cut back to him, I was far less invested in what was going on. I didn't feel nearly as engaged with the film as I did when we were cutting to, say, like Mike and Marcus, or even when we cut to like Alexander Ludwig and Vanessa Hudgens. I felt more attached to them than I did to the villain of this movie. And so I think that was that's probably the one thing that really does bring this film down, is that even though, yes, I think the climax is very exciting, and I think there's a lot of really great moments in the third act, The villain as a whole, I just didn't really feel all that connected to, and I think that's something the movie just really needed to work more on, because I think they were really doing a good job of diving deeper into the villains and getting you to care more about them. This just kind of feels like a big step back, and this kind of just feels like we're regressing in that sense. Everything else in this movie, it feels like we're understanding the franchise, we're going in new and interesting directions, and we're taking these characters to new places. That's great. The villain is the one area where it feels like, all right, yeah, we're kind of just going back to how things were, and I just don't really care about the villain in this film and probably won't remember him at all. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say. That's really, like, one of the biggest, probably the biggest issue in a film that has quite a few. That probably is the biggest issue in this film for me overall. Now, I mentioned before how this movie has a fairly predictable plot, and it really didn't hinder the film that much for me because I was so invested in what was going on, and I enjoyed the mission that these characters were, going through and everything that we ended up seeing. But there is a reveal of and that is mostly the case, save for this one reveal we get. There is a moment in the movie where we find out something that I found to be incredibly obvious, and I was really hoping the movie would not go in the direction that it did, but they did, and it made me a little less impressed by this particular side of things. I honestly found what they did to be kind of superfluous. It feels like it's just there to try to heighten the tension, heighten the suspense of what's going on, and by the end I was like, you honestly didn't really need to do this. You didn't really need to even have this thing happen in the movie. Like, you could have still had the film go the same way, but you didn't really need this to be a big element of the film, and yet they did, and it just, by the end, felt kind of superfluous to me. So that was the one thing that, like, in a film that has a lot of predictable moments, this is really the only one that really ended up generally hurting the film for me, and I think that they really needed to either find a way to make it less obvious or just cut it entirely, because by the end I just didn't really see the point of it. But overall, and if we're talking about a summer blockbuster that just really finds a way to keep things exciting and fresh, but also just has so many entertaining and fun sequences, as well as just some really great characters with some really snappy dialogue, some really funny moments, some really generally impressive action sequences that takes this franchise to new heights in a way we haven't seen before, I think Bad Boys Ride or Die really just fits into all the ingredients you need to make a really fun summer blockbuster. There are some things that are a bit of a step down. The villain isn't as great as I want it to be. There's some moments that do feel a little bit underwritten in terms of character, but I really appreciate the different places they take our two main leads in this movie. The fun moments that we had throughout, also just fun how much effort they are all putting into these roles, as well as just how much of a talent both Adil and Bilall really are in this movie. I really do feel like they have a genuine future, and I can't wait to see more of what they end up directing, because I really just feel they have it in them. They give this film such a fun sense of style that I think it otherwise just simply wouldn't have. Honestly, I'm just really impressed by how this film turned out. I think it was very easy, especially considering that, from what I understand, this is the smallest gap they've had in between films. It would have been very easy for them to make a throwaway sequel, but they really didn't here. There's a lot more thought, a lot more effort put into this than I think anyone was really expecting, and I think overall, in a summer that has kind of disappointed so far, I think this is easily one of the bigger successes. I think this is definitely the kind of movie that a lot of people are just really going to love. My audience was just, like I said, just really eating up everything that this movie was really selling, and I think this is the definition of just a really fun crowd pleaser. It's not quite on the level of the previous film, but I still just had such a fun time with Bad Boys Ride or Die, and moving forward, I mean, if they want to keep making these movies, I will be there no matter what, as long as they're able to continue finding things to do with these characters that are exciting and different. Also, have these actors that are just so into what they're doing. I will definitely, continue to be a fan, and I can't wait to see what else they are going to do with these characters moving forward. I do feel like we're probably getting a sequel here, because the movie did do, so far at least, has done relatively well, so I do think this movie definitely is most likely going to continue to go on, and hopefully we continue to get more of them, because I'm definitely down to see more of what they do with these characters moving forward. Are there a lot of ridiculous directions this end up going? Yes. Are there moments that are a bit implausible? Yes. But when the movie is as much fun and you have actors that are having just But when the movie is so unapologetically fun, but also has so much thought put into it, I really can't complain all that much. I generally just had such a fun time with Bad Boys Ride or Die. It's easily one of the most entertaining films of the entire year, as well as some of the most fun I've had with any movie this year. And I'm definitely going to give Bad Boys Ride or Die overall a B. But over, guys, to my review of Bad Boys Ride or Die. Let me know if you guys saw this movie at all, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. So, okay, bye.